Hello and welcome to your final lecture for the video lecture, that is, for project management. Today's video lecture is all going to be about resource leveling. We're going to talk about some resource constraints within a project, but one of the key restraints of any project is going to be resources, particularly manpower resources. This chapter is all about taking a look and understanding when our resources overloaded and how do we level those resources once they become overloaded. This is a shorter video this week because the chapter 12 is quite a bit shorter. The concept, though, is still a fairly detailed one. And again, my objective today is not to make you project management professionals, but my objective is for you to understand the concept in project leveling, resource leveling, and project constraints. So with that being said, again, please answer the discussion questions, turn them in to me on Monday. And with that being said, let's get on with your final video lecture. So as stated in the introduction, we are going to talk about resource management in this last video lecture for the semester. In any project, there are really four types of constraints. A project manager is only constrained by really four things. The first one is physical. Can we actually do the project? Is it physically possible to do the project? Can we get the machines in the room? Can we build a new factory? Can we physically launch a particular product? Is the product available? Is the technology available, etc., etc.? So the first thing the project manager and management has to decide, is the project physically able to be undertaken? Is it physically able to be done on time and done, period? The second type of constraint is time. We've only got X amount, and everybody's always constrained by time. And I talked about this the last time we were together, that in some particular industries, like the electronics industry, biotechnology, etc., you know, after 6 months, you're a dinosaur. The market has moved on. The environment is so dynamic that the market moves on. And so your constraint is, say, a 6-month window. If you can't launch a new product within the 6 months, there's no sense in launching it. So time is a constraint. The other thing, and this is where we're going to concentrate in this particular video lecture, is resources. Do we have the manpower? Do we have the people? Do we have the physical resources in which to do it? Do we have enough people in finance? We have enough people in production, accounting, marketing, what have you. And then finally, the last one we talk about is mix, a mix of all of those. And the reason that mix is really important in this particular instance is because resources, manpower especially, resources, is only constrained by time. Because we have, generally speaking, enough resources, even if one person's doing it, as long as the steps are sequential and they have the knowledge on how to do it, and there is no overlapping steps, and they have enough time. So really, resources are, and you're going to see it, and we're going to talk about this in leveling and things like that, but resources are really constrained by time. If it wasn't a time constraint, there wouldn't be a resource constraint. And the next few slides are going to show that very evidently. So the first thing you've got to do for resource management is determine, are we overloading our resources? Do we have enough resources, or are they overloaded? So the first thing you've got to do is you've got to understand, what are the process steps in the project? What do we have to do in the project to get it done? Now there's two ways you can do that, and you see both of them here. The first way is a table. You can write all the activities down, as you can see here on the left, describe the activities, take a look at the duration of how long it's going to take the activities. You look at, is there any predecessors for the activities? In other words, is there a critical path? And in this particular case, you can see that B and C needs to be done after A, and there's no predecessor for A. And then the members assigned. Which one has the skills? Which person has the skills in order to do that? So they've done it in a table, as you can see in this particular instance right here. The other way you can do it is the way we've done it in the past. I call it a high-level process step. They call it a precedence resource steps. And that is by taking a look at each process step like we did before, and then assigning a start date, a finish date, and a resources, as well as the duration. As you can see, assigned bids in this particular case is assigned to Tom, and there's 5 days, and the start date is Monday 6/9. And then you go to move to document awards, which the precedence is A, as you can see here. And Jeff is going to be doing it, as well as calculate costs. Jeff is going to be doing that also. He has the skills in which to do it. And assigned bids has to precede it. Both of these examples are good. I particularly like the one that you're looking at now in the box because I'm a visual kind of guy, and it's a lot easier for me to see process steps from a visual standpoint, etc. But as you can see, if you take a look at this particular example and you take a look at this particular example, it doesn't show what we really want to know. What we really want to know is, do we have the amount of resources, and are there any resources that are overloaded? So if you take a look now on the next slide, now we've taken both of those, either the table or the process steps, whichever one you're comfortable with, and it doesn't matter really whichever one you're comfortable with, and we've put it in a Gantt chart. When we put it in a Gantt chart, and we've actually put a timeline to the Gantt chart, as well as the duration of the work and who's going to do the work, as well as the details. Now in this particular case, they've got the details only as work. But if you put the details down, now you see a major problem. Can anybody see the problem here? Well, the major problem is that Jeff has to do 80 hours of work in 1 week's time. As we know, unless Jeff has absolutely, positively no life, Jeff can't do that. We're overloading Jeff. We've overloaded the allocation of our resource. And again, remember, resources are only constrained by time. If it didn't have to be done in 1 week, then Jeff could get it done. If say it could be done over a period of a month, then we're not overloading Jeff because he's got 80 hours of work over a month's time, which is easily accomplished. But in this particular case, we've taken a look and saw that we are overloading Jeff, and this isn't going to work. So now we do something called resource leveling. There's one of two things that you can do here, and there's only one of two things. There's no other way to solve this. One, either you take a look at those two steps that Jeff has to do, and as you can see up here, that would be step B and step C. You either take a look at those two steps and you spread it out over more time, and therefore you've got a delay in the project, and we've talked about this, and that's a contingency. You've got a contingency in the project. Or you resource level and you add a new resource. And that's what we've done in this particular slide. We've taken a look at the two things that Jeff has to do, and we've given one of them to Bob. Now, instead of taking the project and delaying the project over a 2-week period, what we've done is we have resource leveled by adding new resources. Now, with that being said, we've got to make sure that there is two things here. The first thing is we've got to make sure that there's a resource available. In this particular case, Bob has to be available, and he has to give up 40 hours of his time. The second thing that we need to consider here is there anybody else in the organization, or is there somebody that we can outsource from into the organization that has the skill set that Jeff has in order to do that? If the answer to those two things are yes, then we can level the resource, as you see what we've done here. If the answer to those two things are no, then there's no other way we can't level the resource. We're going to have to take a look at one of the constraints, which is time. and we're going to have to lay out that time for a longer duration of period. Therefore, the project starts to move from getting done in, say, a specific time all the way to at least a week's delay. So I've given you an example of resource leveling. Here's a definition of resource leveling, and it's a process that addresses the challenges of project constraints. Mostly, though, again, in this particular case, we're going to look at the constraints from a resource standpoint, not from a time standpoint, because, again, time is only a matter of resources. If I had enough people, I'd get anything done. So we're going to take a look at resources, in this particular case, manpower resources. So in resource leveling, our objective is to determine the right resources at the right time. And to determine, do we have those resources, or do we going to have to spread out the time? And then what we're going to do is, once we determine the right resources at the right time, then we've got to allow each activity to be scheduled with the smoothest possible transitions from one resource to another without overloading one resource or the other. So how do you determine what resources need to be leveled, and how to prioritize which ones to level first, second, third, or fourth, which ones to not level at all and let the project slip, or which ones to say that we don't have enough to level the resources and we're going to have to crash the project, or we're going to have to discontinue the project. So here are really the rules of prioritization. The first one is you take a look at which one has the smallest amount of slack. Which one has to be done right after the other one? Which one has no slack in between the two? Those, generally speaking, are the ones that you need to prioritize first for leveling. The other thing is you got to look at is which one has the smallest duration. Which process step or which project step has the smallest duration? If it has a very small duration, then you also have to prioritize that either first or second. The third one is which has the lowest ID number. Now remember, an ID number is simply the sequential number in which it has to be done. For instance, an ID number 6 would be, it's the 6th step in that particular project. So what has the lowest ID number? In other words, which has to come first in the activity work breakdown schedule? What has the greatest number of successor tasks? And that goes back to number 3 as what is the lowest ID number. And then finally, what requires the most resources? So if you take a look and you prioritize all of those, then you can prioritize which steps need resource leveling first, second, third, fourth, or fifth. So now we move into the general procedure for leveling. And these are the 5 steps for leveling. 1, create a project activity. 2, develop a resource loading table. 3, determine the activity late finish dates. 4, understand resource allocation or over-allocation, or if there is resource over-allocation. And 5, level the resources. So the first thing is you create a project activity network diagram. You can either do it like I have shown here in this particular example right here, and do an activity network diagram that way, or you can do an activity network diagram this way, which shows you resource A has to be done, then it has to be resource B, and then resource D and E. Resource C has some slack, as you can see. Resource C also can be done while resource B, D, and E are being done. And again, that is not critical path. There's slack there. And then finally, resource F. So that right there is a simple project network. So that's what you would have to do first. Then you would have to develop a resource loading table. I'm going to show you what one of those are in just a second. So you develop a resource loading table, and then you determine the late finish start dates, and again move on from there. So as you create a resource loading chart, you want to make sure that you construct it sequentially and also in critical path. And all of these 6 steps are the way to do it. After you do that, you get something that looks like this. So now once you've created a simple project network, then you want to create a resource loading chart. We have taken a look at this chart right here, activity A, B, C, D, E, and F, and we've simply developed this chart from this particular resource project network. And I know I'm jumping back and forth, and I hope I'm not giving you a headache by doing that. But I know I'm jumping back and forth, but you can't do one without the other. The first thing you've got to do is make sure that you do a sample project network, and you can see it here. This has the number of the resource A, B, C, or excuse me, the step A, B, C, D, the resources that you're going to need, the start time, and the slack time. And that's what you can see here. So activity A, you need 6 resources. The duration is 4 days. There is no early slack and there's no late slack. And it's going to take you 4 days to do it. And from there on, we do the next activity, B, C, D, and E. So now we've created a resource loading, excuse me, that was a resource loading table. Now we go to resource loading chart. We've taken a look at all of those activities, A, B, C, D, E, and F. We've put it in a chart or a timeline on project days. As you can see, project A takes 4 days. Project B takes really about a day. Project C takes 3 days. Project D goes from 7 to 11, so it takes 4 days. Project F takes 1 day. And we've taken a look at this, and we have on the x-axis, or the vertical axis, we have resources, and on the y-axis, the horizontal axis, we have project days. Now we can visually see which steps are going to take the most resources, that would be A, D, and F, and which steps it has to be done in the shortest amount of time. And that would be F, and then A, and then D. So if I'm taking a look at this, now again, this is all done because we had our sample project resource network, and then we had our resource loading chart, and then from there, we've made resource loading table. I keep calling that a chart, but it's not, it's a table. Resource loading table, and then we put it into our resource loading chart. I can visually see what needs to be leveled first. If I was the project manager, can you guys guess? Take a guess what you think would be leveled first. If I was a project manager, I would level step F first. The reason is because it takes a lot of resources, 6 resources, and it has to be done in the shortest amount of time. And there's also a lot of steps before it. So I would take a look at F. I would resource level that first. Then I would take a look at D, and I would make sure that I had the level of resources that I need for F. Then I would take a look at resource D, and I would level that second to make sure I had enough resources for that. And then I would take a look at resource A and level that third. Resource C I wouldn't worry too much about because there's a lot of slack there, and it can be done sequentially while B is being done. So that's kind of how you do it. Again, in a quick summary. And remember, I'm not trying to make you PMPs. I'm not trying to make you project managers, but you need to understand this concept. So step 1, project network. Step 2, create a resource loading table. Put that table into a resource loading chart right here. And then once you do that, you can visually see what resources needs to be leveled first, second, third, etc. That becomes increasingly important for project managers when they have a multi-project environment. There's always schedule slippages. There's also resource utilization becomes extraordinarily important because oftentimes project managers are running 3 or 4 projects at the same time, and those projects teams within those 3 or 4 projects are working very closely, and oftentimes there's overlap between resources in one another. They got to take a look at what is in inventory as far as process steps go, and then they've got to take a look at resource decisions in multi-project environment, including the greatest resource demand, the greatest resource utilization, the one project that needs to be done most, the project that has the highest priority, etc., etc., etc. So as you can see, this particular chapter dealt with a project resource leveling with only one project. It gets extraordinarily difficult when you're managing multiple projects, and especially if they're large projects in an environment, especially when one project might take a year. You might be building a new plant, and another project is launching a new product, and that's got to be done in 4 weeks or 5 weeks or something like that. So when you're managing resources in a multi-project environment, it really becomes very, very critical to level resources and to make sure that you have the right resource utilization. Your constraints become even more visible. So in summary, I'm not going to read this to you. You can put the video on pause and read the summary. And that's going to pretty much do it for our video lectures for this semester. I'm sure you didn't really enjoy them per se, but hopefully you learned something from each one of the video lectures, and hopefully you got some really good concepts and got a good understanding of all the intricacies of project management. Again, here's your 4 discussion questions, and make sure you please give me a couple of pages, half page for each discussion question. And with that being said, I look forward to seeing you this Monday.